without the human cost that millions of people living in this city have to be dealing with. Fawid Asadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Back to that breaking news, and the U.S. Military Central Command has confirmed that a 7th U.S. service member has been killed in action during operations against Iran. Let's cross to Washington, D.C. Heidi Jo Castro standing by for us there. So, Heidi, what more do we know about this latest development?
Well, according to U.S. Central Command, this 7th U.S. service person was injured initially on March 1st. That was the day after the U.S. launched its airstrikes against Iran. And the service person was wounded in the strikes in Saudi Arabia targeting U.S. troops. Now, reporting at the time showed that that was when Iranian missiles and drones targeted the Prince Sultan Air Base, and what appears to be a communications building was destroyed in that attack. This is just emphasizing that although the number of U.S. fatalities from military members is at 7 now with this latest update, there are still about a dozen who were seriously injured in these retaliatory strikes that Iran has waged. And just yesterday, President Donald Trump received the bodies of the first 6 who were killed in Kuwait, also on March 1st. And so as this conflict ramps up, we are seeing the increase of U.S. casualties. This is something that the U.S. public has been very adamant that they do not want to see, and potentially quite damaging to Trump as he continues to wage this war against Iran.
That's Heidi Jo Castro on the 7th U.S. service member killed in action during operations against Iran. Thanks, Heidi. For the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps has warned that further attacks on Iranian infrastructure will be responded to in kind. In a statement, they say the U.S. and Israel, in addition to killing civilians, have gone further by targeting fuel and energy infrastructure. And the Iranian military has so far refrained from any similar action, despite identifying all fuel, energy and public service infrastructure in the region. It says Iran expects the governments of Islamic countries to urgently warn the US and Israel. Otherwise, quote, similar actions will occur in the region. And if you can tolerate oil prices exceeding $200 per barrel, continue this game, they said. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says his country will not surrender, despite demands from President Trump. Speaking to U.S. media, Araghchi said Iran will keep fighting.
This is what he asked previous time, last year in June, that when Israel started to attack us, President Trump used the same phrase, unconditional surrender. That was the tweet he made. And that didn't happen. We resisted, and after 12 days, Israelis asked for unconditional ceasefire. So we never give up, we never surrender, and we continue to resist as long as it takes. We continue to defend ourselves, and we are defending our territory, our people, and our dignity. And our dignity is not for sale.
Let's cross to Tehran straight away. Mohammed Val standing by for us there in the Iranian capital. Mohammed, first up, can you just give us the very latest on incoming and outgoing attacks?
Yes, Nick, just a few minutes ago, there were new blasts in the city of Tehran, and that is something that has been almost the order of the day. We have heard also blasts 1 hour ago, and that happened many times during the day. Tehran, as you see, is blanketed in toxic clouds since last night. So the Iranians are already here in Tehran living in that situation of apprehension, fear of what's to come, and the consequences of what they have witnessed during the last 24 hours. So strikes are continuing across Tehran and across Iran. And also, on the other hand, the Iranians have announced a new wave of what they call the True Promise #4 operation against particularly missiles and drones against Israel and other targets in the region. I don't have the specifics so far. Usually they announce that in an hour or two about the places they targeted and the results of that operation. So it's a situation of defiance here in Iran. And as you mentioned in your intro, the Iranians, all the leaders are repeating the same lines about the anger that is here in Iran about the targeting of Iranian infrastructure that is related to civilian life and so on. I have also, aside from the foreign minister, I have a Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammed Baqir Qalibaf, saying the enemy has started targeting our energy reservoirs, and this means a war on infrastructure. If this continues, rest assured that we will target their infrastructure. So if this continues, indicates that probably this time the Iranians are not going to do much about what happened, except the warnings and the declaration of the intent to retaliate. But if it is repeated and if more facilities are hit, they are really going to respond, as they say.
And with all that as a backdrop, we're also anticipating the announcement of a new supreme leader.
Yeah, a member of the Assembly of Experts, remember the Assembly of Experts, a body of 88 members, tasked with electing a new supreme leader. He said that the public should be patient, the public should be bracing for the announcement very soon of the new supreme leader, and that preparation is going on since day one as per the constitution. He reminded the people of Iran that the circumstances this time around are much different from the ones that were during the election of the Imam Khomeini, the supreme leader that was the first one of the revolution. So this time around it is different, and preparations are going under secrecy, extreme secrecy, and probably the meetings are not happening in the same manner as mentioned in the constitution. So it is going to take time and specific preparations, specific precaution measures, but it is going to happen, and it is happening. And there are rumors and uncorroborated reports that the name of the new supreme leader is already known, but it's not going to be announced right now because the Israelis and Americans have threatened to kill any new supreme leader. So, I mean, even if they have already agreed, they might not announce the name soon until they make sure that proper preparations have been put in place for the safety of the new head of the country.
Mohammed Valverde reporting from Tehran. Thanks, Mohammed. Well, the U.S. Energy Secretary has been speaking on American television to try and reassure people that the conflict won't drive up oil prices for long.
They shouldn't go much higher than they are here because the world is very well supplied with oil. There's no energy shortage at all in the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
The United States is a net exporter of oil, a large net exporter of natural gas, but refineries in Asia and Europe are seeing an interruption from the normal crude flows. But there is massive energy stores around the world. What you're seeing is emotional reactions and fear that this is a long-term war. This is not a long-term war. It's a temporary movement.
Back to Heidi Jo Castro in Washington, D.C. And Heidi, an effort there to reassure people.
That's right, but what we didn't hear Chris Wright, the U.S. Energy Secretary, say there is that, in fact, oil prices, gas prices here in the U.S. have risen 14% since the start of the conflict, and that is something that Americans driving on any road cannot ignore. And so that does that is a point of weakness as the Trump administration continues to wage its war against Iran. Wright also said in that interview that he does not expect for the tankers to be stalled for much longer in the Strait of Hormuz, saying that he believes that the U.S. and Israeli military has taken out missiles that Iran would use to target ships, and that soon those ships will be moving again. Again, a very optimistic tone. He said that this is a temporary war, but we've also heard contradictory statements coming from the U.S. president in which he said that this could go on as long as needed, initially saying this could go on for a few weeks and then leaving it to be open-ended. None of this is reassuring to the U.S. public. In one of the latest polls to NPR News and PBS, 56% of those polled said that they oppose these military actions by Trump against Iran, and only 36% approve how he is handling Iran. And now, with this latest news of that 7th U.S. service member killed in action as a result of this conflict in just the first week, that is already proving to be something that Trump has to confront, as he's now going to receive more bodies of those fallen U.S. soldiers.
Heidi, thanks for that. Heidi Jo Castro in Washington, D.C. Well, an Iranian military official says Tehran will intensify its offensive against Israel and the United States from Sunday night. Yes, the warning comes as sirens sounded across central Israel and Tel Aviv after the Israeli military detected missiles launched from Iran. Medics say 3 people were injured in central Israel, one of them seriously, after debris from an intercepted missile fell to the ground. Let's head to Ramallah and speak to Noor O'Day. So, Noor, just tell us about casualties. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that 2 Israeli soldiers have been confirmed dead in confrontations with Hezbollah in the occupied part of southern Lebanon, Nick, along with several others injured, some of them critically. Now, this is a reflection of the intensity of this war front that Israel opened with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Northern communities in Israel are having sirens go off non-stop, even though the military censor is imposing basically a blackout on the number of Iranian and Hezbollah missiles and drones that have targeted Israel. One Israeli channel estimates that up to 400 rockets were fired from Hezbollah alone. In the meantime, the Israeli army is telling the public to be patient, that emergency restrictions will not be lifted, that in fact there is some consideration as to whether the northern communities in Israel should be evacuated, but that all will be well. Basically, that they should not believe their lying eyes. The northern communities know very well how fierce, how ferocious the confrontation is at their end, and that fellow Israelis are getting less of a warning time from incoming Iranian missiles because of the damage to radars across the region. So this, as far as narrative is concerned, as far as the way the Israeli government first communicated a very optimistic tone about this war, it's not really faring out very well. And right now, the estimate is this war with Iran will go on well past the Passover holidays next month. So at least 5 more weeks. And in the meantime, no respite for the economy, for people who want to go back to work. Restrictions are still in place.
Noor, thank you for that. Noor O'Day speaking just there from Ramallah. Saudi Arabia says 2 people have been killed when a projectile fell on a residential area in the country. Officials say it happened in the central governorate of Al-Kaj, southeast of the capital, Riyadh. Saudi civil defense says a military munition fell on housing quarters which belonged to a maintenance and cleaning company. 12 other people have been injured. Now, a special meeting of the Arab League Council has been held to discuss the conflict in the Middle East and the implications for the broader region. Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs released this statement. It said the meeting discussed the Iranian attacks on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of several Arab countries, which constitute a flagrant violation of international laws and charters, as well as the principles of good neighborliness. It also addressed the serious risk these actions pose to the security and stability of Arab states and indeed the region. And the Omani foreign minister, that's Badr al-Busaidi, who mediated, in fact, the US-Iran talks before the war, also released a statement following the meeting. He says the action taken by Israel and the US against Iran is both immoral and illegal, but the retaliation by Iran against its neighbors is also deeply regrettable and unacceptable. I call for restraint on all sides, he said, a ceasefire and an urgent return to diplomacy. Also heard from Bahrain's king, who's condemned what he called Iran's unprecedented and unjustifiable attacks on his country and other Gulf nations. In a televised speech, King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa also praised the support and solidarity felt from within the region.
Bahrain has always been and will remain a nation of peace, never initiating hostilities against anyone and always pursuing cooperation and good neighborliness. We highly commend the readiness, vigilance, and national responsibility demonstrated by our armed forces, their valiant personnel and all relevant agencies, and their resolute response that thwarted these attempts and preserved the security of the nation and the safety of its citizens and residents.
For more on that, let's speak with Al Jazeera's Laura Khan, who's standing by for us here in Doha. And Laura, hearing there from the King of Bahrain, it seems there's a sense of a collective voice from the region.
There's absolutely a collective voice, and this is all coming from the sidelines of diplomacy. We're in the 9th day of the war. This is spilt out into the Gulf region. There has been successive waves of both drones, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles sent from Iran across the Gulf region. The United Arab Emirates has been one of the worst hit. They've seen 1,422 drones, the majority of them they're intercepting, but some of them have been landing in populated areas in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, but also in Saudi Arabia, where we've seen the latest death toll climbing up with these two foreign nationals of Bangladeshi and Pakistani descent. But going back to the diplomacy, this is where really you're seeing the Gulf nations, the Arab nations getting together with a unified voice alongside, we've just seen the Bahraini king as well adding to those voices. Now, this really started these kind of meetings taking place, these emergency meetings with the Gulf Cooperation Council meeting with the European Union on Thursday, essentially virtually. So the main message there is that the Gulf nations said that they would not allow any of their bases to be used to attack Iran. So they wouldn't be used by America and absolutely not Israel. But they also said that what Iran was doing by retaliating against these Gulf nations is illegal under international law, and they have every right to defend themselves. Now, we know that some of the European countries individually are sending some military hardware, some aircraft, in order for them to bolster defenses. They said under Article 12 of the United Nations agreement, they are allowed to defend themselves with what they can as they see fit. So this message has been continuous since the beginning of the war, but really we're seeing that strengthening now between not only Gulf nations, but now with the Arab League holding their own emergency summit.
Laura, could you also bring us up to speed with the latest in Iranian attacks in the Gulf region, including, of course, those deaths in Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely. Now, the latest attack that we've got from the military defense from Saudi Arabia is in an area called Shaiba. Now, this is a giant oil field that's on the border with the United Arab Emirates, only 10 kilometers away. It houses about 1,000 civilian personnel there. Now, Saudi Arabia said it had intercepted a drone there. So clearly that could have been there to attack this gas and oil, this oil infrastructure. We also saw this attack in the Al-Kharj governorate. I was reporting on the same area only 2 days ago that was also under attack. We don't know specifically why they've chosen that area or whether the interceptions caused this missile to fall, but it had killed 2 foreign nationals there. As I said, we're also seeing the death toll creeping up in the United Arab Emirates. We know from today 4 people have been killed since the beginning of the war. And again, foreign nationals, it seems like they're there to earn money, to labor. So this has been, of course, very tough on the Gulf nations because they're saying they're using their kind of multiple layered defense systems to protect not only the nation, but they rely on these foreign nationals to come from around the world. These are international hubs that have been relatively insulated from other wars and conflicts taking place around the Middle East. They were always considered to be the safe havens. This is the very identity that you find of Dubai, of Abu Dhabi, of Qatar. So, of course, this is really shaking up their identity. So it's important, as I said, for them all to come together with this unified voice to say they won't stand that and they will continue to defend their countries.
That's Laura Kine in Doha. Thanks, Laura. Okay, let's bring in our guest to discuss the latest developments. In Boston, we have Rami Khoury, who's a distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut. And in Washington, D.C., we have Mark Kimmett, who's a retired American general, a former Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs. Gents, welcome to you both. And Mark Kimmett, I'd like to start with you, if I may. So you will have heard, I'm sure, a 7th U.S. serviceman has been killed. If the death toll continues to grow, what difficulties does that create for an administration enthusiastically prosecuting this war?
Well, I think, first of all, we grieve for the family that has lost a soldier in combat. It is the 7th As they say, every death is a tragedy. 1,000 deaths is a statistic, and I certainly hope we don't have to take that attitude about the loss of life. I want to stay away from that comment because what it does is or answering the question, because what it does is suggest that there's some sort of political usage of these deaths as an excuse to go against the president. But the fact remains is I think most Americans understand the massive threat that comes from a nuclear-armed Iran. And at this point, while it is a tragedy, I think the Americans are willing to accept this cost to finally end the threat that comes from Iran.
Right. Rami Corey, do you agree with that? And also, it's interesting because we heard from the U.S. Energy Secretary a bit earlier, speaking on American television to try and reassure people that the conflict won't drive up oil prices for long. And they've gone up, what, 14%, something like that. So there are implications on many levels for U.S. citizens, right?
Well, I agree with General Kimmett about we all mourn the death of any person from any country in a war situation, and we have thousands to mourn in Lebanon and Iran, and hundreds of thousands in Gaza and Palestine. So that's a universal issue. The other point he made, which I'd like to comment on, is that the people, the whole world see, or the Americans and the world see a great threat in Iran. Most of the world doesn't see this threat. The evidence for it is simply not there. And the way, if there is a threat, the way to deal with it is to resolve it politically, which was underway under the Obama administration, and then Trump stopped it, and then they were negotiating again. So the United States has to rely less on its military and technological power and rely less on the blood-curdling advice it gets from the State of Israel, which wants to go around killing people all over the region, as it's doing now in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and Yemen, and Iran. And to really just look at how these tensions really emerged and to resolve them politically through negotiations. The U.S. has done that once or twice in the past, but not very often. It tends to go to its military power first. And then Vietnam was an example, Iraq was an example, Afghanistan was an example, and all of those left behind them a trail of destruction and chaos and terrorism and all kinds of terrible things. So I think it's time for the U.S. to get a better hold, better grip on the realities of what goes on in this region, because there's two certainties in war. One is death and the sorrow that brings, and the other is resistance from the people who are attacked.
Mark Kimmett, could you respond to that briefly?
Yeah, I would simply say that I agree with Rami on the needs for negotiation, but I think to get back to negotiation, the Iranians are going to have to pay a fairly serious price, which is perhaps make the concessions that they were unwilling to make before. I would comment that I think a significant amount of the world recognizes the threat that would come from 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium being put into dirty bombs, particularly from a regime who has, since 1979, talked about death to America, death to Israel, and, oh, by the way, has been no friends to their neighbors. The fact that in the last set of negotiations, Iran was unwilling to even discuss the issues of proxies, the issues of ballistic missiles, and was trying to fine-tune to the narrowest sense the nuclear talks, it would appear to me that they were trying to revisit the Obama plan and didn't realize that that was a plan unacceptable to President Trump because of the leakage.
All right, let's move on to the how this war is turning out at this moment in time. And Rami, we've seen this spread into Lebanon already and elsewhere indeed. Are you concerned also about the potential for an Iranian proxy called the Houthis in Yemen to get involved?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them proxies. I'd call them strategic allies. They're very close to each other, and they work together very closely. Iran helped develop the power of Hezbollah and the Ansarullah, the Houthis, and others in the region. So they will probably get involved if they feel threatened. And if they don't get involved now, they're probably going to get attacked again. The U.S. and Israel and Great Britain have already bombed them several times. And so the reality is that the Israelis will not allow any force, whether it's a country, an armed movement, or whatever it is, any force in the greater Middle East and West Asia that resists Israel's hegemonic goal will not allow that to exist, and they'll keep after them and bomb them and bring them down to size and destroy them, regardless of the carnage that's left behind. So I'm not worried about the Ansarullah in Yemen so much getting involved in the war, because they can be checked pretty easily, but they can't be defeated. And this is the deep problem, that if there's one deep problem that the United States has never understood, and I've spent the last 50 years in and out of the United States at university. I was there in Vietnam. I was on in and out during Afghanistan. So I know the U.S. Really well, and I am a dual national, American and Jordanian and Palestinian. So I know the U.S. really well. The U.S. system generally, with a few exceptions, just doesn't understand the motivations of people in these countries in the Middle East, and assumes that they will bow down to threats and sanctions and attacks and destruction. And the lesson of history is that that doesn't happen very often.
Mark, there's a very real danger, isn't there, of this spiraling? How do you read that, especially given that today we heard from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, who warned that further attacks on Iranian infrastructure will be responded to in kind across this region, the Gulf region. This after, of course, fuel depots were destroyed in Tehran and beyond.
Yeah, I agree with you that there could be further escalation. I also agree with Rami about a couple of the other issues, but with regards to the Houthis, Israel was probably the last country to attack the Houthis. They've been attacked and fought with the Egyptians. They've been attacked and fought against the Emiratis, the Saudis. None of those had anything to do with Israel. So I don't necessarily think that the Houthis are necessarily anti-Israel alone. They're anti a lot of people, and to somehow use vernacular that they're strategic alliance. Well, the fact is that the Iranians armed, trained, equipped, and funded the Houthis. If that's not a proxy, then I don't know what is.
Mark Hammett in Washington, D.C., Rami Khoury in Boston. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. I do appreciate your perspectives both. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. A reminder of the key developments this hour. And huge explosions have been heard in different parts of Tehran. Millions of people in the Iranian capital are struggling with toxic air after the US and Israel attacked oil storage and refining facilities for the first time overnight. The Israeli military has warned it will target anyone who replaces Iran's assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The warning comes as Iran's clerical body is set to meet to decide who will succeed him. He was killed in a US-Israeli airstrike just over a week ago. The US military central command has confirmed a 7th soldier has been killed. He died from injuries sustained in Saudi Arabia during an Iranian attack on US troops on March the 1st. In Lebanon, 18 people, including children, have been killed during an Israeli attack in the south. The Israeli military has been issuing threats to residents of southern Lebanon to leave their homes. Well, Lebanon says more than 500,000 people have been displaced by Israeli attacks as the Israeli army continues to issue forced displacement orders. But targets have also been hit outside the forced displacement zones. Bernard Smith has more now from Beirut.
The village of Sir El Garbia is north of the Litani River, supposedly safer ground outside the so-called evacuation zone Israel has declared over southern Lebanon. But there are no front lines in this conflict. 19 people, including women and children, were killed when an Israeli airstrike hit here on Sunday morning. No evacuation order was given in advance.
There are still 400 to 500 families in the village. As regards this massacre, we're used to the enemy and what it does. There's nothing here. It's all children and women and elderly. This was a 3-story building. Nothing shocks us anymore because we've grown used to it.
Israel has also continued to strike targets in Beirut's southern suburbs. And for the first time in the center of the capital, Beirut, 4 people were killed when this seafront hotel was hit. Israel says it was targeting members of Iran's elite Quds military force. The hotel and others around it are full of people displaced from southern Lebanon. More than 112,000 internally displaced Lebanese are living in schools or other empty buildings. At this church, migrant workers are being given shelter, often day labourers. If there's no work, there's no income.
Of course there is fear. There were many strikes where we were. Even the farm and the buildings where we used to work were destroyed. Thank God we managed to leave, even though we came only on the motorcycle and with almost nothing.
I saw the fight and the bomb everywhere where my husband used to work overtime, the place also. So we ran away, we came here.
We were afraid, you know. We were afraid that we might lose our lives there. So no car can take us, you know, to bring us here. So we are really afraid about it, you know.
More than 100 Iranians, including some diplomats, were flown out from Beirut overnight on a Russian plane. Lebanon's government has banned any activity by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, an important backer of Hezbollah, and it's imposed visa requirements on Iranians entering the country. What it's not done yet is enforce a commitment to disarm Hezbollah, a demand of Israel that risks sparking sectarian conflict here. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
The United Arab Emirates says the death toll from Iranian attacks has now risen to 4. Its foreign ministry has released a statement saying the country is in a state of defense in response to the brutal and unprovoked Iranian aggression. It added the attacks continue to violate international law and the United Nations Charter. The ministry also stressed that the UAE does not seek to be drawn into conflicts or escalation. Well, Iran has launched waves of ballistic missiles and drones right across the Middle East after Israel and the US launched their attacks on February the 28th. While most have been intercepted, some have hit military and civilian infrastructure. But Iran's main target, that's Israel, of course, is hardest to reach. Imay Kulsum Sharif explains.
Iran has launched hundreds of ballistic missiles towards Israel since the conflict began. Now, the distance between Iran's capital, Tehran, and Tel Aviv in Israel is about 1,600 kilometers. Now, Iran does have missiles that can cover that distance, but they need to transit other countries, which makes striking Israel a challenge. Let me explain. Let's say Iran launches dozens of missiles towards Israel. They travel through Iraq and Syria. They could also go over Saudi Arabia. But what could happen in Iraq, where you have US military bases? You have the American Patriot system that engages and destroys these missiles. So let's say we've lost some of these missiles out here. The ones that are remaining then enter the Syrian and Jordanian airspace. And by then, you have the Israeli air defenses that engage and destroy these missiles. Now, we have Jordan also that helps Israel intercept incoming projectiles. Now, we have the missiles entering the Israeli airspace, and then they're targeted by US warships that are stationed here. Remember, the US Navy has a significant presence in the Mediterranean Sea. And finally, we have the missiles when they are inside the Israeli airspace. They are targeted by a multi-layer air defense system that includes the Iron Dome, the David Sling, and Arrow system, apart from the American THAAD air defenses. And despite all of that, you have Iranian missiles that are actually hitting targets inside Israel. The time taken for a missile from Iran to reach Israel is about 10 to 12 minutes. And this is the damage we're seeing inside Tel Aviv after an Iranian missile strike. At least 11 people have been killed in the past 9 days.
President Donald Trump has denied the US carried out a strike on a girls' school in Iran that killed 165 people. The attack in the southern city of Mina happened just hours into the joint Israeli and US attacks. Human Rights Watch has called for the strike to be investigated as a possible war crime. Hamza Mohammed has this now.
This is what remains of the Girls' Elementary School in Minab in southern Iran. Most of the students were between 8 and 12 years old. Classes were underway on the first day of the US and Israel's attacks on Iran when a strike hit the building. More than 160 people were killed, their bodies overwhelming hospitals across the area. There were so many victims, excavators were brought in to dig their graves. Iran has accused the United States and Israel of carrying out the attack.
I want to announce to the global community that this crime in Minab occurred while the global community speaks of civilization, speaks of human rights, speaks of the rights of children and adolescents. Yet before the eyes of the international community and in the silence of international institutions, this savage crime has taken place.
The US military says it's investigating the attack, but President Donald Trump said Iran itself was responsible without citing any evidence.
We think it was done by Iran because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran.
A claim outrightly rejected by Iran.
It is our school, these are our students, our girls, and they are attacked by an American fighter, a jet fighter, and they have been killed. Why Iran is responsible?
American media reports and analysis of the evidence suggest the US military was behind the strike. At least 4 schools have been hit since the war began. The UN and rights groups have condemned the attack and called for an independent investigation, meaning the killings in Minab could become a defining test of accountability in the conflict. Hamza Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
Air travel to and from destinations in the Middle East has been severely disrupted since the Iran war began. Qatar Airways has begun to operate a handful of flights from Europe to Doha's Hamad International Airport. Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javed was on a Qatar Airways flight that left from Paris and brings us this report.
I am on board just one of the 5 flights that are heading towards Doha now. These are operated by Qatar Airways, as many passengers who were stranded in Doha wanted to go to Europe, and some of them who were in Europe who wanted to come back. So only a few dozen passengers on this flight. But it just goes to show the disruptions that thousands of passengers have been facing, because 23,000 flights have been cancelled in the Middle East. Hundreds of millions of dollars of losses are estimated, and it is not just flights, it is freight, it is everything else to do with the air. And aviation industry has already been suffering due to the COVID pandemic, and it was on the way to recovery. But it appears that now this is going to have a knock-on effect for months and years to come. Aviation experts are saying it is not just the passengers who are facing this. Qatar Airways is the second largest freight carrier after FedEx, and all of the logistics because of these closures is going to have a knock-on impact on a lot of provisions that come from the air. So after the Red Sea closures, a lot of passengers as well as freight was moved towards the air, but it appears that now that too will have to be reconfigured. It appears that now we are going to move towards Doha, and the airspace is going to be accompanied by some sort of air cover. The crew has been telling us that there might be some fighter jets who will accompany these aircraft to make sure that there is safety and security. But it is a situation which has been unpredictable, and people here are confident that their flights have only taken place because the airline feels confident that they will safely land. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera, somewhere over the Middle Eastern airways.
Well, as the war rages overhead, Palestinians face 2 major threats: no protection from the missiles and growing settler violence. Israeli settler attacks have killed 4 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank in the last 24 hours. Did Abraham reports now from Abu Falah.
It was just past midnight on Sunday when a large Israeli settler attack started. Palestinians used rocks to push settlers away, and just as they thought they did, armed settlers opened fire. They killed 2 Palestinian cousins, Farer, 57, and Thair, 24. Both were shot in the head. They died on the spot. 7 others were injured, some by live fire. A 3rd Palestinian died after inhaling tear gas fired by Israeli soldiers raiding the village. 55-year-old Muhammad Murra was in his home. His family tells us he couldn't breathe and tried to escape the tear gas, but could not. The 3 men were laid to rest in the village on Sunday. People here show us how close the illegal Israeli settlement outposts are inching towards them. They fear the next attack is a matter of time.
We often see Israeli settlers coming in smaller numbers, sometimes 4 or 5, maybe as many as 10, and we flash our lights and then they leave. But this time, we think there was around 100 of them.
The Israeli army has released a statement saying it's investigating the attacks. But many Palestinians say the blatant impunity enjoyed by Israeli settlers has only emboldened them.
From the sky, it's one war. On the ground, it is another. Not only are Palestinians being trapped in a war they did not choose, but they continue to face Israeli settler attacks.
On Saturday, Israeli settlers killed a Palestinian man near his home in Masafer Yatta in the southern occupied West Bank. War or no war, Israeli settler attacks on Palestinians do not stop. But in times like these, they get buried beneath the headlines. The main headline, the US-Israeli war on Iran. But caught in the middle are Palestinians who have no shelter or defense systems. Shrapnel keeps falling across the occupied West Bank, and Palestinian civil defense teams say nearly 100 incidents have been recorded since the war started. Palestinians say Israel's aerial defense systems are built to protect one people and leave the other exposed to wars and settler violence. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, the occupied West Bank, Palestine.
The US and Israeli attacks on Iran are also having an impact in Gaza, where supply lines have been disrupted, and that's leading to shortages and rising food prices. Hani Mahmoud has more now from Gaza City.
Here in one of Gaza markets, people are once again rushing to buy whatever they can. The latest regional escalation, the war involving the United States, Iran, and Israel, is being felt in the most immediate way. Closed border crossings and shrinking supplies. One thing to keep in mind that Gaza depends almost entirely on goods and products entering the crossings with Egypt and Israel. Now, for the past 2 years, these crossings have either been completely shut or restricted by the Israeli military, just disrupting the flow of goods and basic supplies into the strip. And the impact is visible in this market. Just about a month ago, 1 kilo of tomatoes was selling for $1.50. Today, it's close to $4. Same goes for the cucumber and the potato, all the fresh produce that many families depend on.
People can no longer afford to buy vegetables and fruits due to high prices caused by the war between Israel and Iran.
And it's not about higher prices only. As we walk by, we hear people, traders, business owners, regular shoppers are all saying that basic supplies are becoming very scarce in the market or completely gone because the Israeli military is either shutting the borders completely or only allowing a trickle amount of commercial trucks and aid into the Gaza Strip. Walking by these shelves and a stack of food, it's easy to realize that many of the basic goods, like cooking oil, flour, and some canned goods have vanished from the market. People buy whatever they can, not because they necessarily need it today, but because they fear supplies could run out tomorrow. For many families, the concern is very simple: how long the borders will stay closed and whether food will be available if they do. Hani Mahmoud, Al Jazeera, from Gaza City, Palestine.
Despite tensions over the Iran attacks, President Trump and China's leader Xi Jinping appear to be settling their differences. The leaders are preparing for a high-stakes meeting, balancing trade and regional tensions. Nasir Newman has this report now from Washington, D.C.
With missiles and drones flying in all directions in the Gulf, many fear the fragile truce between Beijing and Washington will crack. Trump calls China a malign influence.
So I want to be nice to China, but China's been very rough with us over the years.
Conventional wisdom would suggest that Beijing could be tempted to attack Taiwan on the assumption that the U.S.'s military resources are already spread thin.
China is deeply concerned about the spread of war into neighboring countries.
But despite the strong rhetoric, ahead of next month's planned meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping, both countries have strong incentives to keep their ties on a steady keel. The White House is keen to finalize a major trade deal with China, including large purchases of U.S. agricultural goods and energy. China, for its part, wants to preserve the one-year trade truce to ensure that U.S. tariffs remain low for Chinese imports and also make sure that rare minerals from China reach U.S. factories. A win-win for both powers. As for Taiwan, the U.S. attacks on Iran may bolster Trump's leverage by demonstrating a readiness to use far greater military force than before. Iran exports nearly 90% of its oil to China, a significant amount. Shipping routes through the Straits of Hormuz, used for half of the oil China imports from the Gulf, have already been seriously disrupted. So for Beijing, the shorter the conflict, the better.
China urges all parties to immediately stop military operations, prevent further escalation of tensions, and avoid regional instability that could have a greater impact on the global economy.
While an ally of Iran, seeing its nuclear program crippled benefits China by reducing the temptations of other Asian rivals, such as Japan, to seek nuclear weapons. And when the conflict is over, China will be able to offer Iran infrastructure projects and technology in exchange for oil. As for Trump...
Every time you meet, you talk about China. We respect China. I do. We both do, I think. But it's always a topic of conversation. We've had a very good relationship with China.
A sign that for both feuding powers, for the time being at least, it's a matter of choosing your battles. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Washington.
All right, let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. And first up, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands has been hosted by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on a visit to Kyiv. Putin and Zelensky laid wreaths at the Wall of Remembrance in the city for fallen soldiers of Ukraine. Putin's visit comes amid concern in Ukraine that the war could slip into the background as global attention shifts to the Middle East. Audrey McAlpine has more now from Kyiv.
Ukrainian and U.S. flags are still sold together as souvenirs, but the relationship isn't what it once was. Alexei says he has noticed a difference.
It was time when Ukraine was number one in whole newspapers everywhere.
Now, with the new war in the Middle East, there are concerns here about how global attention might shift away from Ukraine and threaten Kyiv's supply of vital air defense missiles from its allies. Ukraine's president is now offering an exchange.
We would like, with the help of countries we can name and those we cannot, to cover our deficit in Patriot missiles. And in return, we can provide the corresponding number of interceptors.
But whilst in their own war, Ukrainians worry whether they have the weapons to spare.
To give assistance where our help isn't actually needed, when drones fly all the way and fall onto the roofs of our houses, that's very strange.
I think we need to deal with our own problems first and only then provide help to others. Otherwise, we'll give everything away to others and end up with nothing ourselves. In my view, we are not in a position of abundance.
Alexei doesn't know how many more of these he'll sell, and it may seem like a small detail, but it reflects a bigger uncertainty. With the U.S.-Ukraine relationship already under strain, many here wonder what shifting global priorities could mean for Ukraine's future.
If all countries think just about themselves, we don't have weapons from other countries and start of the war. So probably Zelensky make right, but who knows? We will see.
Audrey McAlpine, Al Jazeera, Kyiv.
A Nepali party led by a rapper-turned-politician is set for a landslide victory in the first parliamentary elections since Gen Z protesters ousted the previous leadership. National Independent Party, led by Balendra Shah, has already won 117 of 165 seats in results published by the Election Commission in Nepal. Final results are expected later in the week. Shah unseated former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli in his own constituency. And polling is continuing in congressional elections in Colombia after a campaign marred by violence. The elections come just months before May's presidential vote. Many see the ballot as a referendum on leftist President Gustavo Petro's agenda. As Al Jazeera's Alessandro Rampietti reports, the campaign unfolded in many areas where armed groups still operate.
I'll take off the vest so I can go unnoticed.
For candidate Liliana Ruiz, every kilometer on the road carries risk in Colombia's volatile Cauca region. Remnants of former FARC rebels still control parts of these mountains, threatening anyone they oppose.
On our way here with the candidate, we were briefly retained by armed rebels. They did not allow us to film. They took our phones. We were questioned. They also took the weapon of the security guard of the candidate. Just another example of the risk candidates face campaigning in these regions.
This fills us with fear. It makes us question what guarantees we really have to carry out this political exercise, which should be free and democratic.
Nearly 10 years after Colombia's peace deal with FARC rebels, campaigning here remains dangerous. Last June, conservative presidential candidate Miguel Uribe Turbay was shot during a campaign event in Bogotá. Hundreds of candidates have received death threats, and election monitors say this has been one of the most dangerous campaigns in decades. Critics say negotiations with armed groups have allowed some to expand their control as cocaine production hit record levels. Liliana's running mate, whose vehicle was shot returning from a campaign event, says communities here are still waiting for the promises of peace.
Social transformations never arrived, and investment never reached these territories. They promised 2.4 trillion pesos in investments over a decade, but so far only 2.8 million have arrived.
As we prepare to head to another event, Ruiz received a warning.
We've just been informed that unfortunately the conditions are not safe and we're not allowed to go. It pains us deeply because we owe it to the communities. That's where we want to be, and that's where we should be. But we have to take these warnings into account.
Indigenous Nasa communities here have long lived on the front line of Colombia's conflict. Nearly a decade after the peace deal, a life and politics free of violence remain out of reach. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera, Toribio, Colombia.
At least 23 people have died after flooding in Kenya's capital. Emergency teams have been combing flooded neighborhoods and riverside settlements for survivors. Here's Catherine Soy.
Parts of Nairobi city are inundated. Several people have been killed by the raging waters. Residents take safety in numbers as they cross the road. In other areas, vehicles were swept away.
I saw the man who normally brings us eggs, drowning. I know him. The water was too much. I later saw his body underneath a car.
Such scenes are not uncommon during the rainy season. Every time it rains heavily, you see this. Around this time last year, more than 100 people died and thousands others were displaced in floods across the country. Just like then, weather experts had already warned Kenyans and relevant agencies to prepare. And now everyone is scrambling to react. In Nairobi, such flooding is blamed on decades of poor urban planning and bad land management. The population is growing, but the drainage system has not kept up, and many people have settled on riparian land along rivers and other water bodies.
And I want to tell the government that they had all indications that there will be El Nino. There will be rains, but they didn't unclog the drainage system, which is very poor here in Nairobi.
This is the Nairobi River. Many residents live illegally in informal settlements along its banks. This is downtown Nairobi, and it's just one of the areas that have been affected by the floods. Inside there is a body. Several people have been killed in the last 24 hours. Vehicles like this one have been destroyed. People's shanties here have been destroyed.